Good afternoon. Mr. Vantes, you ready?
Every day ready. One ready.
John, we ready over there? Russ? Madam Superintendent? All right. Call the order to the Greater Albany Public Schools School Board meeting, special session at 6:10. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was item B. We'll move down to C, is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the agenda as presented.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. And just for clarification, Chris is going to do minutes from the recording.
That's correct.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Item letter D is public comment on proposed interim superintendent. It was really good to see so many people pour comments in. I feel bad for the district having to compile all those because I kept looking during the day and they were getting edited and put in through the day, but I appreciate it. I know there was a lot of comments directly sent to individual board members. Has everyone had a chance, or do you have questions about comments to public that came in?
No, I had a chance to read them and was able to tabulate kind of how it came down and it's a lot of great input, a lot of great questions from the community. I think they have a lot of interest. So it'll be interesting to see how we go forward.
It was over 100
Yeah.
comments. A lot of them were positive, high majority positive. It's exciting, and they're excited to move on.
Okay, and we will make sure all those comments get entered into the record as our protocol. Moving on to letter E, interview proposed interim superintendent candidate by the board members. So how we're going to do this today is each board member is going to ask 2 questions. You have a list of questions that are recommended from the district and from the public in front of you. You also have the liberty to ask your own questions. We are limiting it to 2. We're going to give Mr. Saxon an opening statement and a closing statement. And be prepared if we kind of venture out what is an appropriate question or anything, that our counsel may stop you and suggest a different question. But the floor is yours, Mr. Saxon.
Thank you, Director Aganagwa. Everyone, my name is Rob Saxton, and I'm a candidate tonight to be interviewed for superintendent of the Greater Albany Public Schools. I think you all know, and I think it's really obvious to everybody that the Albany community and parents in the Albany community care deeply about their public schools. And all you have to do is see the number of comments that pour in over a short time period, or the people who are outside tonight expressing their opinion about what's taking place here in the Greater Albany Public Schools. And it just, I think it's a challenge what's underway here for sure, but I do really like the fact that people care enough to state their opinion and be active and say what happens with our kids and the education of our kids in Albany is important to us, and enough that we're passionate about it. And so that's, I think, outstanding. I'm a person who grew up in Oregon, been wanting to be an educator for a really long time. I've had lots of different jobs in education. I used to tell, or once in a while I'll joke and say, well, I must not be able to hang on to a job, but I always went to another job because I was so excited about the opportunities that were being presented in education in front of me that I took the opportunity sometimes to move to another one. But I've loved every single job that I've ever had in education, and so I look forward to this opportunity if it's afforded to me. I spent a lot of time in Albany as a young man. My grandfather owned a drugstore here in Albany. I lived at 12th and Calapooya. In fact, I turned so I could go by the old house, actually, on 12th and Calapooya, and looked where my grandparents lived and where I spent a lot of time as a young man. And when I graduated Linfield College, I left the state for a couple years to Texas. to teach. We were in a depression here in Oregon, or at least a recession, and there weren't a lot of education jobs, so I went and did that, and I came back. And my very first job in Oregon was teaching math and coaching at West Albany High School. And I did that for 2 years. 3 years, and I enjoyed it greatly. And then I had an opportunity to go to South Albany and teach math, and I coached 3 sports at South Albany for, I think, every year that I was there. I was there for 7 years. I was the head football coach. I also coached track and, for a while, wrestling. And not a great wrestler, but they needed some help, and I said that I would do that. And so it was a great experience. In fact, you know, when you look back, I mean, I don't know if I even want to recount how many years now in education. I'd have to do some math. I was a math teacher. You think I could do that pretty quick. But, you know, nearly 40 years in education. And I actually, when I think back about the impact that I hope that I was able to have on kids from a standpoint of just being there and doing the work, I don't know that I ever had a greater impact on kids than I did at the time that I spent at South Albany. There was the hands-on kind of work that needed to be done there, and I enjoyed it terrifically. And then I was back to West Albany for a couple years as an assistant principal, which I also liked a lot, and then to McMinnville High School as a high school principal. From there, I was superintendent in Sherwood for 5 years, Tiger Tualatin for 7 years. Governor John Kitzhaber selected me to be the first appointed deputy superintendent for public instruction in the state of Oregon. I did that for 3 years, enjoyed it greatly, and then 3 years at the Northwest Regional Education Service District. And for the last 2 years, I've been an education consultant. And in that work as a consultant, I've done a lot of different kinds of work, just supporting districts, did a lot of negotiating superintendent's contracts, and I've enjoyed that a great deal and just kept my hand in the work. I spent a lot of time working with school districts in the first year of that around the SIA, the Student Investment Account, and the work that happened there, and learned a great deal there. Over the course of my time as an educator, I hope that I've grown and become more able and more thoughtful in the way that I go about the work. One of the things that I have become very committed to is making sure that we make sure that all kids have a great opportunity to be learners. And I think that we have, as in school systems, had kids who have been historically underserved. Equity is a very important thing to me as I go about doing the work. And I hope that I'm able to make that clear to you over the course of the interview tonight, and that my approach to doing that work would be one that would be meaningful and change outcomes for kids over time, and make sure that all kids get the opportunities to be their absolute very best. And so I believe that every system is perfectly designed to deliver the outcome that it gives. And when we look at outcomes for kids, we see that there are some predictable disparities among our kids. And we need to make sure that we close those disparities and that all kids are able to achieve at really high levels. So I'd want to make sure and say that. I think it's a really important piece of who I am and who I've grown into, hopefully, for the better as an educator. I would be really humbled to do the work here. I think there's a great deal to do. I hope that I could be somebody who would provide some healing, but also some opportunity and some inspiration, and perhaps help the district move forward and as quickly as possible to get a leader who could be your permanent leader over time, and to continue to help the district move forward with all kids. I think this is a great district, and the kids here and the educators here are extremely important people, and they deserve our very best. And so I hope I could bring that to you. Thank you.
So I've chosen to go alphabetically by first name. So Mr. Wilson, you are first.
Okay. Mr. Saxon, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's an honor to have you here and to consider coming back to Albany to help us through this troubling time. And I look forward to be a uniter. I know you used that term in the last board meeting, and I believe that you can do that. And I would like to expand a little bit more on your equity question that you brought up, and perhaps define for us more how equity would be defined as utilized in the classroom, especially when we have students with such divergent needs, with talented, gifted students and at-risk students all having to get a quality education and a fixed budget. How can we best manage this to get everyone what they need?
Yeah, Director Wilson, when somebody can answer that question exactly right, I think that we will have begun to have arrived. That's a really difficult needle to thread, but a lot of, I think what we have to do when we start thinking about equity is to look at our outcomes. I talked a little bit about systems and outcomes, is to look at our outcomes and understand what it looks like. You talked a little bit about TAG. I mean, one of my questions would be who's in TAG and how do they get there? And how do we measure that they're ready to be in TAG? And if we see that there's a real disparity in who shows up in TAG, then I think we've got something wrong, because certainly every child is capable of being talented and gifted in equal measure, right? I mean, it is that I wouldn't think that white students or Latino students or black students would have any advantage in being in TAG, and yet when we look at TAG numbers, we do see disparity. And so I think we really would have to look at our TAG program and say, what's happening there? What are the criteria for which we get entry? How do we describe what it is that we're going to do with students who are in TAG so that we're really thoughtful about what would make somebody interested in that, and that we do a great job of communicating what that is to all parents in the ways that they would appreciate and understand. And probably one of the greatest things, or one of the most important things about equity when we try to figure out how we're going to get equitable outcomes, is to ask people what it is that they need in order to cause those things to happen. And when I say ask, I mean you have to ask everybody and listen really hard in a way that they're going to understand and that you can appreciate. So those are a couple things on the TAG end. I also really believe that when you start talking about equity, you need to be sure that what you're always doing is being additive. You cannot take away. And I think there's a great fear that there's going to be this takeaway. And yet I also believe that when all kids have an equal opportunity to be their very best and that we deliver in that way, there's a growth that comes from that you can't experience unless you're meeting the needs of every child. And even when you think about how a teacher has to teach to reach all kids, it's very it's very difficult to do. And yet when someone learns to do that, the access to the content is then there for more people. And so I really believe that it's possible to teach in a way that will give some kids access to content and not others. And so making sure that your teaching gives access to the content to all kids, I think then starts to broaden who's able to be successful in the area of equity. And that doesn't take anything away from anyone, but it does mean that you have to be thoughtful about how you're going to engage in professional development and how you're going to deliver instruction in the classroom. And those things cost some money around the professional development, but they don't cost some money in having a teacher deliver that in a different methodology within the classroom so that all kids have access to the learning. So I don't know that gets exactly at what you were after. On the budgetary piece, I do think that we have to be thoughtful about how dollars are going to be distributed. I've tried to think for a long time about how you can talk about equity in a way when you start talking about dollars. And my simplistic thought on this is that when my two kids needed braces, I didn't say, I'm going to make sure that I spend the exact same amount on both of their braces, and we're going to keep them on just as long, no matter what the situation is. This one needed braces for a certain amount of time, and that one for a certain amount of time, and there were different costs that were associated with that, but I was going to give them what they needed in order to be successful around having straight teeth, right? And so I spent the money where it was needed in order to cause that to happen. And I think that's true within a school district as well. At the same time, you've got to make sure you're not taking away, you're giving. And that's the neat trick, right? And having everybody understand it that way is difficult as well, but it would be my intent.
Thank you.
Sure.
Was that both or you
Oh, so
reserve
I have
it
to go
for-
both? Oh, I do
Well, you
know.
can reserve it for later if you want me to go. I
I'll
can ask
reserve for
one.
later, yeah, that'd be fine.
Perfect. So I will go. Thank you for coming today, Mr. Saxon. I really appreciate it. My question is regarding very closely to Brad's, but I've witnessed at our district having diverse administration impact our students very positively. Having a Latino principal and watching our Latino population, watching their graduation rates raise, watching dropout rates lower, and just seeing the pride and performance of these students. What would be, I know the job of an interim superintendent sometimes is a little, I don't want to do too much or I'm going to do a lot. It's a fine balancing act. But what would be your 1 year goal for bringing in more administrators of color if those positions open up, or diverse administrators?
Yeah. I don't know what kind of openings there are or anything, Director Aganago.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. In education, we've taken lots of input on lots of the work that we do. And one of the things that we've taken a lot of input on is when we hire administrators, especially school principals and assistant principals. You have lots of staff input and input from a principal if it's an assistant principal, or a director if it's a principal position. And we put together hiring committees and review resumes and so forth. And so I do think that the people that you put together to be the input on hiring of administrators has got to be a group that has some learning and training about attracting and interviewing diverse candidates. I do think that the way that you go about advertising and the kinds of messages that you send out are very important. And so making sure that you get that right is important. Where you advertise is important. The message that the district sends out about itself sort of generally, right, is really important. And what I have found is that oftentimes when we put together a pool to be interviewed, we'll have a group of people who are going to sit in on that interview process that might even be, I mean, it should be at the very minimum, representative of the community. And so what does the community look like, and make sure that you're going to have representative of the community. But oftentimes that would not necessarily predicate or predict that you're going to have a candidate of color come through on the interview process. And part of what's really difficult to understand about this is that as a white man, I can sit in an interview process and listen and watch and hear what the interview is, how the interview is unfolding, and hear the answers that I see and hear. And I'm going to have my opinion about whether the answer is the best or the second best or someplace in between, right? Based on my experience as a white man and as a school administrator. But my experience may not be what that community needs, right? And my expectation may not be what that community needs necessarily in order for kids to be as successful as possible. And so I've got to have a group of people who are listening to that interview who are going to be empowered to give input and to help us make really good decisions about who eventually gets hired into the position in a way that they can say to me, actually, I thought that answer was really good, and here's why, and why it would work for my child as a person of color, for example. And that's a part of that, and in order to move candidates through the kinds of processes that we've put in education, it requires those kinds of thoughtful interactions and interventions in order to cause us to be able to select the best candidate for the school and the community that administrator is going to serve. And so that's a really hard question. It's answered after lots of experience and lots of soul searching about how to do precisely what your question was, and making sure that schools have the best leaders so that all children can see themselves in the leaders that are there, and that they can aspire to their very best and understand that the leadership that they're going to get is going to fit with the kids that are being served. And again, that leader needs to meet the needs of all kids, right, and all parents and the entire community. And how that gets done, and this is probably the part that I would want everybody to hear with me about equity. How that gets done is incredibly delicate and important, right? Because I honestly believe, and the first two questions are about equity, and I know that there are a lot of people listening to this tonight, and my answers are going to, be much discussed probably, and that's good. I think that kind of debate and discussion in the community is healthy, but we've got to make sure that we're doing right by everybody. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your question. your answer. Director Thompson.
So my question's about the roles, the different roles that the board and the superintendent or interim superintendent play. And I think this board has a hard time with those distinct roles. And so I'm going to ask you straight up, will you protect a staff complainant from any influence, perceived or actual retaliation from board members? We have a complaint process, KL. Staff can make complaints that may ultimately be about board members. A board member, I can't come to you and say, I want X, Russ is a bad, it's not my role to tell you to fire him or reassign him even.
Okay, I think I understand the question, Director Thompson, thank you. I think my short answer is yes. I don't know any examples specifically that you're talking about or whatever, but I know that there is board policy, and I think it's important to follow board policy. As a superintendent, I've always been very specific with the board about this is what the superintendent does, this is what the board does. And I've been willing at different times to say to board members, that's not your job, that's my job. And I will imagine I'll say that a few times in the upcoming year, and I'll say it in as nice a way as I possibly can so that people can hear me, but I'll also be very clear and direct in that kind of communication. The idea that it would say in any contract that I would sign that the superintendent has the right to organize and run the district and the staff in the district.
Okay.
Director Morse.
Mr. Saxton, looking through your resume and stuff, one of the things that really piqued my interest and I was impressed with is you have a documented history of success improving the statewide test scores of all your district students, but in particular the minority students. How do you feel you have achieved this success, and how would you bring this to our district?
Director Morse, thank you. Well, honestly, I've never probably improved systems test scores or closed achievement gaps at all, but the teachers in the places that I led did. And it's something that I was really proud of, and that I was fortunate to have the opportunity to lead some places that had incredible educators. And honestly, I think that all educators are amazing. And I've had that opportunity, and I hope that what we did was put together a team of people who were thoughtful and cared deeply about kids and worked really hard to deliver fantastic instruction in the classroom. I know that, when I went to the Tiger Tualatin School District as the superintendent, it was really interesting because, and I think that when you talk about that, that's a place that I can think of specifically, or I think that the work we did was good work, not that it wasn't in other places, but it's the one that comes to my mind. And the community had changed and was changing. It was a community where there were more and more Latino students and African American students than there had been previously. And quite frankly, I was superintendent in the Sherwood School District at the time, and I got feedback from people in the community that there was sort of this sense of loss or something because of that. And I thought it should be a sense of celebration because the community is becoming more diverse, and the learning that kids were going to have the opportunity to experience because of that, and because of the life that they were going to lead as they headed out into the community, where that experience was going to be more real, was really important. And so instead of something negative, it seemed like such a positive to me. And I really think that about America. I mean, it's a place where all of our cultures bring so much strength to who we are, right? And so I really felt like that was going to be that way in the Albany, or in the Tiger Tualatin School District. And so that was something that I was really excited about. And as the community began to change, my question really was, what can we do to get in front of that and make sure that some of the kinds of achievements that I'm seeing in other districts does never manifest itself in the Tigard-Tualatin School District. And so we set out to try to figure out how we were going to learn about, talk about, and understand equity as a district, and what it was that we were going to need to do to make sure that every child had an opportunity to be their very best and achieve at their very highest levels in the district. And we began to, as a group, learn about equitable practices and equity in general to start with. Educators care about kids. That's why they do the work, right? It is the thing. And so if you say to an educator, here are the kids, and if you teach this way, these kids will be great, and if you teach that way, other kids will, but if you teach this way, all kids, they're going to go number 3. And they'll throw themselves at the learning and the understanding and the changing of practice with vigor. And so those are the conversations that we had and the intent that we expressed. And people dug in, and we went to work on it. And we changed how we thought about the work that we had underway, and we weren't perfect, right? I mean, we still experienced some achievement disparities over time, but we were better than the vast majority, and we closed those over time, and we were intentional about it. We said, here's where we are, here's where we need to get, and this is what we need to do to get there. Let's put that plan in place, and let's make it happen. And I think there was a collective that gathered around in that district, and it felt like a really nice piece of work that we did as a team.
Director Nyquist?
Thank you for being here.
Sure, thanks.
Appreciate it. We are in unprecedented times with the development of kids and education, in that kids going into the 3rd grade, the last full year of school they've gotten has been kindergarten. Kids going into middle school, the last full year that they've gotten has been the 3rd grade. And 6th graders who were a full year in 6th grade are now starting high school. There's a lot to go with that. There's a lot educationally, there's a lot socially. One of my concerns in all of that is it would appear that we didn't get, not just we as a state, didn't get the normal data in the way of testing that you would get in a normal year. I'm told by the Department of Ed that they need at least 80% participation to get an adequate baseline to know where a school or a group of kids is at. And while not knowing class by class where we are here, I'm told at the state level that the best they got was like 35%. And when I ask questions about what's the plan to address the issue, it's largely a teacher in the classroom with 30 kids, figuring that thing out individually, one by one. And I'm very concerned about the start of the school year. I'm feeling a lot of urgency about getting this thing right now. And so you have thoughts about that, about these unprecedented times and helping all the kids get the tools they need to get back up to speed by the end of the school year, for example, so that they don't become the generational COVID kids who never got a fair shot at an education.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Director Nyquist. Wow, y'all are pitching me some good ones here. As I head into this job, there are some things that I know, and things that I know I hope really well, and then there's some things I don't. I don't know Albany's budget. I don't know what kind of federal funds were received or extra state funds that were received by the budget, or what plans the district currently has in place, quite frankly, around helping kids catch up with summer school, after-school programs, winter intercession, spring intercession, Saturday school opportunities, and so forth. There's all kinds of opportunities, I hope, because I think there are some dollars that are available and that have come in from the feds and the state that can go to work on helping with that. The assessment piece is a challenging one. There are some assessments that districts can give. certainly some of the test makers, Smarter Balance, for example, had a series of tests that are, the Smarter Balance test was what was called a summative test. It's a test to measure what kids have learned at the end of instruction, summative. And then there are also assessments that are called formative assessments. Those are assessments that teachers give maybe on a daily basis or every other day or weekly that say, this is what I think that you've learned over time, and now that I know that as a group in a classroom, I can change my instruction, or I can think about what I ought to be teaching in a way that will make sure that any holes that were left in what you've learned formatively can be closed. And so, Smarter Balanced has a series of formative assessments. There's an education group out of Portland that offers assessments that do that kind of work, that are strong assessments that districts can purchase and deliver to kids. There's always a really intricate balance between testing and learning. And so how much time is taken up by any kind of an assessment that a student gets? And I do think that that was part of the problem in Oregon last year, right, is that kids almost didn't go to school at all. And then when they did show up, the idea that we're going to spend a ton of time with assessment in the few days that they have doesn't seem all that appropriate, right? And so there's sort of this weird place that happened in the spring last year, and I saw lots of people, lots of districts and education policymakers struggle with what the right way to move forward was. I do think that teachers in the classroom, my mom was a first grade teacher, Highland Elementary, room 2, her entire career. And she loved teaching first grade in room 2 at Highland Elementary. My mom, as a first grade teacher, knew how first graders showed up because she did that a lot of years. And if kids showed up and they weren't where her previous classes had been, she could go to work on that. She could change some of her curricula. She can modify some of the instruction, and then talk about what is it that we're going to do to make sure that we get kids caught up to where they need to be. So what kinds of programs and offerings can we do to get that done? And so I think that's a conversation for our community to have. What assessments should we give if there are some? What will teachers know or not know as kids show up about where they should be and what some of those holes are? What can they tell us about where kids are so that they can be talking about the instruction that they have? And then what resources do we have to make sure that we get kids caught up as quickly as possible? But the discussion about that, the plan of it, and then goal setting to cause it to happen is how those things get done. And so appreciating it, understanding it, and putting a plan in place to address it is what's going to cause that to happen. I would have to spend some real time digging into that, and I'll need to do that if we're going to move forward and help kids get where they should have been. Sure.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. As Director Nyquist alluded to, this last year was an unprecedented and will be an asterisk year for all of us. During the past year, there were a lot of changes, a lot of staff upheavals. And one of the things that's been an upheaval is the change in the schedule for the high schools. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, if you'd had a chance to study the schedule changes that were proposed. That's a one-year proposal change. And there's been a lot of heartburn in the community over that change.
Yes, Director Wilson, yes. Yeah, you guys are right on it. So,
There's no softballs tonight.
yeah,
sir.
no, there you go. So, I do think there's been a lot of upheaval in the last year, and there's been lots of change. And I do think that the more we can, reduce that and give our educators, people were flat worn out at the end of the year. I keep in touch with so many people in education in the state. I don't know anybody who said this was easy and I'm refreshed, or even said this feels regular. I've talked to a lot of people who said by Thanksgiving that I'm worn out and I don't know how I'm going to do this. So there was plenty of that. I do know that there has been schedule change in high school, in Greater Albany Public Schools that is slated to take, place in the upcoming school year. I also am aware that, there's a desire due to the building that was done and some of the really beautiful spaces that have been put together for kids to be able to access some of those spaces and the programs from one high school to another, from between west and south, and take advantage of some of the courses that are offered and available one place or another. I do think that you have to think about the balance of that. I have looked at school schedules over the course of my own career lots of different times and tried to understand what kinds of schedules are there that would help students achieve at their highest level. I know when I went to McMinnville, block scheduling or different types of block scheduling are all the rage, and we spent a long time with staff trying to figure out what kind of schedule we would go to at McMinnville High School. And if my memory serves me right, I think we set a bar of 85% agreement among staff members before we could change. I don't know why in the world we said 85%, it's impossible with high school staff, but we eventually did get to an 85% agreement. We changed the schedule, and it was really hard. And partway through the year, I remember teachers coming and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. And we spent a ton of time in the spring. Once we had made that decision, which happened sometime around winter break, we spent a ton of time in the spring saying, how are you going to change your curriculum? How are you going to teach differently so that kids get what they need? And we did a bunch of professional development with teachers. And then we spent a bunch of time over the summer making sure that curriculum was ready so that when kids did arrive, that students were ready to teach in a new schedule. And they were theoretically ready, but they hadn't done it before. And it was really hard. Again, there were times when people just said, we want to go back. And we didn't. We moved forward, and the schedule, eventually people got to where they needed to be, and they, I think, were successful in educating kids. Over time, I've thought about that a lot. I went through a process in Tiger Tualatin, a district that has 2 high schools, go figure. And they were on different schedules and trying to figure out what to do there. And I spent time on it there too. I can tell you that most education research will tell you that the exact schedule that you have at the high school does not matter very much when it comes to student learning. The total outcome of student learning doesn't matter very much. A 7-period day, 4x4, A, B schedule, all the different kinds of trimester, all the different kinds of schedules that people talk about, that the eventual learning outcome is not changed a lot by the schedule, if at all. And I've felt bad a couple times about how much time we spent on that when I was principal in McMinnville High School, because we spent a lot of time on it and maybe it didn't matter. We thought it did at the time, or we hoped that it would. I've tried not to make decisions like that without pretty good educational data and practice since that time. Not always, but I try to do that. And so, I have rambled around this a little bit, but I also don't like to play games very much, and I'll be direct about what I think, I hope, and have some rationale about those things as we do it. But were I to be the superintendent, I would think it would be important to not change the high school schedules for next year at the 2 high schools. I think that there could be some small changes in schedule times in hopes that we would allow kids to be able to move back and forth. We might think about busing in a little bit different way, but the schedule in general, I would like to see go back to the schedules that they were last year. And if we think as a group that it's really important then to examine high school schedules so that there was a common schedule for the 2 high schools, that there could be some time that would be put forward in the upcoming year that would do that. That being said, I just told you I don't think that that's always a great way to spend time. And so it's going to be a busy year. I don't know if it's a great way to spend time. I would need to be convinced that if we spent time to do that and create a common schedule for the 2 high schools next year, that 2 things were true. One, that there was maybe 3 things. One would be that there was a significant equity reason to do that. If that were true, I'm ready to go, but I need to understand it. And the community needs to understand it. It can't just be me. It's got to be the community understanding the purpose. So there's that. And that I know that kids actually would take advantage and move back and forth between the schools. A lot of studies will show that even though there's opportunities that are created by school districts, that kids don't always avail themselves to that. Now, there's a culture to that. There are a few places where kids actually do go back and forth, but by and large, that's not the case in school districts. So I would think we would need to really spend some time talking to high school kids and parents and saying, are you going to do this or not? Are you going to take advantage of this or not? And if the answer is yes, and then there is a reason that will change equitable outcomes for kids, then we would need to spend a lot of time studying and getting to a common set of agreement, not 85%. I'm never going to say that number again. I said it once, I would never do it again. But we'll have to come to some agreement about what it's going to take in order to get to agreement to get to agreement, and then move forward. But I think with the upheaval that's been experienced, if it were possible, and it is, and as superintendent, I would want to do that, so I'm just being very clear about that. I hope that it would be my intent to move back to the high school schedules that were largely in existence in the prior years, with maybe some small modification. I also know that, whether or not this is part of the question, I also know that, or understand that there's been a demand and bargain that's been issued around this from the association. And I don't know that moving back would solve that issue, especially if there were a couple minute schedule changes, and that's always up to an association or to teachers' association to decide how they want to approach that kind of thing. But I would hope that perhaps that would go away as well. And again, I would want to work with the association on that, make sure that that was part of the possibility.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Saxon, my question revolves around classified staff. When we talk about our staff, we often say teachers, but we really just mean staff. Classified staff have saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars with our bond work, taking on some of that work instead of contracting it out. They are in charge of welfare and safety for our students multiple times a day, and education for our students multiple times a day. How have you, or do you have ideas to improve staff morale and on classified staff, make them feel more appreciated and from a district level?
Yeah. When I went to, I have to tell, I'm a storyteller, I apologize, but I just am, so you're going to hear stories from me once in a while. When I went to McMinnville High School as principal, I had the lead secretary there, Liz, came into my office about my second day, and she said, I noticed at the staff meeting today, you said teachers in the meeting. And I said, okay. And she said, I need you to know something. I'm the head secretary at this school, and I consider myself staff. And I'm really smart and capable. And I've been here 18 years, and you've been here just a couple of days. I need you to make sure that you're always being respectful and inclusive of classified staff. What I do when I come here is my very best to educate kids. So everybody brings a different gift or a different way about how they do the work in a school district. And there are teachers who stand up in front of kids every day and teach them. I don't do that. It's not my gift. But I do have a gift as a head secretary at this school, and I am an educator because I cause this place to function better and for the delivery point to be as keen as possible and as effective as possible. And I am an educator, and I want you to always know that. And I mean, you said, yes, ma'am, right? And sat back and said, I got it. And you know, thanks to her, it was a learning, a really good learning. Not that I didn't know it before, right? Not that I didn't understand how important classified people were. My mom was a career-long first-grade teacher. My dad was a high school teacher and high school administrator, and they understood the incredible value of our classified staff and the work that they did. I think maybe the best job I ever did of the work that you're talking about, was in my very last job at the Northwest Regional Education Service District. And I had weekly video messages to staff, and I would call in people and interview them almost like a TV show or something like that. And we'd talk about the work that was underway in our region. And one of the greatest pleasures for me was to have classified educators come in and talk about the work that they did and sometimes say, well, I work in the business office and I make sure people get payroll. And then being able to draw that work to the work that we did with kids and how incredibly important that is, because again, I don't think there's any greater title than educator. And that person who's working to make sure everybody gets their paycheck is an educator within the system. And the work that they do is directly drawn to that. And that message needs to be understood broadly by everyone. And I think that when people know the difference that they make and understand the difference and it's appreciated and you state it and you make it part of how you create the community of educators within a district, then it's understood and that morale can be really at its very top or be improved if it needs to be. And our classified people are incredible and the work that they do is extremely important.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Director Thompson?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick one from the public. This goes to, I noticed in your resume, you kind of lucked out. You were not involved in administration during COVID. And so you got to avoid the whole RSSL protocols and decisions and whatnot. The person asked, the Delta variant is causing increased concerns in Oregon and around the country. If this trend continues, would you recommend to the school board a mask requirement this fall for elementary students, all of whom are unvaccinated? I think it's 12 and under is the key demographic there.
Yeah, a great question. Thank you, Director Thompson. Yes, if you look at my resume, you don't know how many times I celebrated last year that I wasn't a superintendent. And even as I looked at this possibility and looked at the Delta variant raising its head, I thought, well, you may not, you may just walk right into it in more ways than one, right? I mean, there's plenty to walk into, but walk right into a need to change up what school looks like this fall. And certainly we have a lot of folks out there that are health experts that are talking about this. I do think that Governor Brown has said, I'm going to leave this up to local communities about what happens. I don't know that that's going to be the case long term, if she's actually going to do that or not. But I am concerned about the Delta variant. I am concerned about the levels of vaccination that exist and the possibility that kids and or adults that they interact with can get sick. I do think that, it does appear that kids, by and large, don't get as sick as adults, and yet I don't know, again, a lot about the Delta variant. And I think it's important for us to listen to experts and move forward with all due caution. And so while it isn't what I would want to have happen, I think there's definitely a possibility that things could change, and that could be masks and it could be online instruction, depending on what happens. And so we're going to have to sit and watch how that develops, and again listen to experts, and it will require, some incredible discussions and input from the community to figure out how we're going to move forward on that. And one of the things that I watched over the past year, and I'll just say this now, is how changeable this thing was, where people would sit down and make unbelievable plans about how it was that they were going to move forward, and the next day something different would happen and those plans would change. And so we have a plan right now, I think, in the Albany School District, Greater Albany Public Schools, and how the school system is going to move forward for the year. But it could change. And I also think that because of its changeability, there were times when people were left with egg on their face because they had come out and said, here's what we're going to do, and then they weren't going to do that, and they had to explain that again. I watched that happen again and again to people across the state who were in education or who owned a business or who were politicians trying to make some decisions, or were medical experts who were trying to make some recommendations. And so we're going to have to deal with that. I hope we'll give each other grace as we move forward, and we certainly have some experience now and some practice in dealing with it, right? And so the idea that I would sit here and say absolutely nothing is going to change, everybody knows that wouldn't be the right answer. And so I hope that you'll let me beg off a little bit and say, let's wait and see what happens, and but let's give people options. Let's have kids in school as much as we possibly can and have it be safe.
Okay, this is a question from one of the community members. You are certainly a well-qualified person to fill the interim superintendent position for the next year. or until a permanent superintendent has been determined. I do have a concern that I'd like to hear you address. As a person who has lived in this community and worked at both South and West Albany high schools, you must be aware of the tension between the two high schools. This tension and sense of competition for resources has grown and has been exacerbated in recent months with the election of 3 new GAPS board members who all have significant ties to West. What steps will you take to heal the division and to reassure all of the GAPS community that they will have your full support?
Well, I would hope that to a certain degree, the idea that I've been at both high schools would be at least something. I'd love to tell you that when I was here, that didn't exist, that, somehow this is something that was new and it's going to go away in a week or two. It existed. There was a huge rivalry between the two schools when I was initially at West and then when I was at South. And I'm not sure that I understood it. And to be completely honest with you, I mean, I went to Tiger Tualatin, and there's a huge rivalry in Tiger Tualatin. But I'm not sure that it was ever on par with what happens here in Albany. So, I do think that you don't accomplish something because you want it to happen. You have to set it out as a goal. You have to say, this is what we hope to accomplish. And then you need to design a plan to reach that goal. And so I do think one of the questions I would have for the board is, what does success look like for me? The day that I am not here, if you decide to move forward with my candidacy, what will have happened if I have been successful? And so if this is one of those things that's really important, and I think it is important, by the way, then I think that needs to be set out as a goal and there needs to be a plan to achieve it. And then we need to carry that out with a great deal of detail and communication. I do think that how many staff does each school have? Does the community on a per student basis, and does the community understand that? What programs exist at the schools, and does the community understand that? And what kind of messages are we sending about the schools from everyone in the community? If everybody wants this to stop, then everybody needs to make it stop, right? So how do we send that message in a way that is going to be effective and get people to de-escalate to a certain degree? They're both wonderful schools. I mean, when I was deputy superintendent, I used to look at every school in the state and what kind of achievement outcomes that they had, whether it happened to be test scores, graduation rates, attendance rates, or 10-day non-attendance rates, or whatever it happened to be. A lot of things that are on the Oregon report card at this point in time, and try to understand what was happening. And I could see what was happening in Albany. And there were some incredible outcomes in Albany. And there also was a gap between the two high schools, and that closed significantly over the last few years. And it really is admirable. I do think that, we need to examine that, understand it, and make sure that that work continues. And part of that is that we might have to think about my braces example and have resources be a little bit different sometimes to make sure that when we get to outcomes, we see the kinds of outcomes that we want to achieve for all kids in the district. And so I think that currently exists to a certain degree, and I think the community needs to know that exists, that there are some resource differences that currently take place. And lastly, I would say that sometimes we are what we think we are, right? There is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And to work on the messaging that we send constantly about who people are and work with them about who they think they are, collectively, a school, is really important. And that's a piece of work that I think would help us with this.
Director Nyquist.
I have a process question. Are we going to ask the candidate if he has questions for us?
Yeah.
Because if we're not, that was going to be my question.
No, at the end, he'll.
Okay, all right. We got a letter of support today from a South Albany graduate who was at South and played ball while you were there. He grew up to become the Lynn County Sheriff. His name is Jim Yon. He called you a man of your word and that you led by example. We, the citizens and taxpayers of this district, I think it was 4 years ago, might be 3, might be 5, passed a $180 million bond to improve our physical facilities in a great way. At that time, I felt like the district had the trust of the public. Since that time, there have been a lot of things happen, some that were within the district's control and some that weren't, that's eroded that trust, if you will. What can you do as an interim superintendent based on your life's work to help us build that team in the community that supports those teams in the buildings?
Yeah. Director Nyquist. Integrity and trust, it's a really hard ones, right? I mean, a person, I want to meet the person who says, I'm not a person of integrity. I mean, the individual who says that about themselves, not me specifically, but the individual that says that about themselves, right? I'm not a person of integrity, or you can't trust me. Everybody wants to say that. I think that you live your life and look at what's out there and do your dead level best to have honesty and integrity and to build trust among people. In any real, I've said this like so many times. It takes away a speech that I would give either to staff or administrators or to both. I think that really trust and integrity, or in trust anyway, at least is about relationships. And in any relationship, there are 3 questions that people want to know. The first question is, can I trust you? I mean, that's what everybody wants to know is, can I trust you? And there's lots of ways that we demonstrate whether or not you can be trusted. By doing what you say, primarily that, by acting the way that you intend to act and that they expect you to act. There's a lot of different, I'll go, but I don't want to get too far. The second one is, can I trust you, right? I think I messed that up there somewhere. Let's see. Oh, I know what it was. Do you care as much about me as I care about you? That's the second question. One is, can I trust you? And the second one is, do you care as much about me as I care about you? And I think that's a really important question. And the only way that you can carry that out is in the way that you carry yourself on a daily basis. We send messages to people constantly about whether that's or not that's true. Whether it's a person when I pull up to a gas station, or the relationship that you have with someone you walk into a school building as a superintendent and say, I'm here not because I'm going to start evaluating you the second that I walk in, but I came here today to tell you with my time and my energy that I care about you. And the third one is, are you committed to excellence? Those are the 3 things people want to know. It's what the community wants to know about us, right? Can they trust us? Do we care as much about them as they care about us collectively? And are we committed to excellence? And I think those are the 3 things that we've got to work on and say and state, and we need to behave that way in order to make sure that we have the community in a relationship that is healthy and effective. I certainly will be out in schools and work to create relationships with teachers and classified staff and administrators. I'll be out in the community. I think it's important for me to meet with community leaders and say, this is who you're dealing with, and this is, as the person who's working to lead on a daily basis the Greater Albany Public Schools, and these are the kinds of communications that you're going to get from me and what you can expect. And then the proof is going to be on what gets carried out on a daily basis, and the communication that goes along with that says this is what we're going to carry out, and then showing that those things actually happen. So I think those are the 3 things that we need to work on in order to create the relationship that this district has long enjoyed with the Albany community. And I hope that if there is any interruption in that, that it can be brief. You know, just in driving in, and there's people with some signs, and you know, there's some people making some noise. There's no doubt that there is an interruption and that there's some upset. But again, I know that people in the community care about kids, and they want this school system to be great on behalf of their community and on behalf of their kids. And we need to give them the kind of demonstration that says that they have a reason to have a relationship with us that would be based in trust, care, and quality.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, Mr. Saxon, I don't know if you know, but you actually just quoted the 3 Air Force core values in that answer. That's pretty outstanding.
Also, the Boy Scout probably
Yeah.
owes somewhere in there. I don't know. I mean, I think that you know, those are really a lot of the words are easy to say, right? Actually, those 3 things are Lou Holtz's, just to give credit where credit is due. But they're really easy to say, and they're very hard to do. I do think that the community cares enough and wants bad enough for this to go well. I hope there can be a step back and a moment of grace given to everybody, so that the organization can move forward as the community wants it to. So,
Do you have any closing statements or questions for the board?
I I was going to say I've probably talked enough, but Lord knows I have a propensity. I would just say that, you know, it's a profound responsibility to be a leader of something that's as important, I think, as schools are. I'm far from a perfect human being. I do care deeply. I will work hard, and you'll get my best. As the superintendent, I have 1,000 things to worry about as I think about this thing, from, you know, relationships with people, the community, and especially kids who want us to be our best. And whether or not, you know, that's gonna be quick or hard or easy or someplace in between. And I don't know why, I probably don't need to say this, but there'll be some personal cost for me here. I'm pretty happily retired, and have a consulting firm, and we've done really well. I probably could do better in my consulting firm next year than I would do being the superintendent here. Or there's other superintendent jobs around the state that are out there. If I really want to do an interim, I can go, you know, at least let them know that I'm interested. But none of them are Albany. I have relationships with people here. This is a special community in my heart. And, you know, I'm willing to do this, and I really hope I'm up to it. Again, you'll get my very best, and I hope that I think there are going to be a couple tough decisions. There'll be some tough decisions as we move forward. I'm sure that my comments about the high school schedule are both, people are happy about that and people are upset about that, even as I do the interview right now. And, you know, I'll have to look at that and get the feedback on that. But I also am not going to be somebody who's going to try to blow too much smoke, right? I am enough of a politician that, you know, I'm going to try to say things in the right way and so forth. But I hope it's going to be direct enough that people understand what it is that I said. And so that's what you'll get from me. I'll work really hard at it. I did not plan on doing this. I actually have, you know, some other life commitments that I've made, and my availability in August isn't great because I've made some other commitments, and I feel bad about that. I think you all need to know that, and I'll be here and spend a lot of hours when I can, but, you know, just starting to warm up on this thing, but there's going to be some time when I'm not here, and I feel bad about that, and if it's enough of an issue, I think you should not hire me, right? I mean, that's just, you need all that somebody has to give right now, and I want to make sure that the community gets what it needs and the kids get what they need. So anyway, like I said, I could blather on, but I probably ought to stop while I'm at least even, or maybe ahead. So thank you very much for the opportunity to interview today, and I hope that my answers were direct enough and gave you some things to think about, and that you know who you would get as a superintendent. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That will move us on to letter F. And Mr. Saxon, if you wouldn't mind just waiting out in the lobby, and
My pleasure.
that way we can deliberate freely, and I'd be thankful. Board members, this is your chance to discuss on the proposed
We want
interim
to close that door behind you.
superintendent. If anyone wants to raise their hand first?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Personally, obviously I'm a proponent of Mr. Rob Saxton. I brought him here. He's a quality dude. He's a quality educator. He's got the background, the skill set, the community ties, the desire. I don't see how we do better. He knows the issues and he's willing to put his time and effort into it. I'm excited about him being an interim superintendent for our district.
Mr. Director Thompson.
Well, no debate, no debate on that. I don't know if you've ever listened to a presentation, a pro and con, or a job interview, and, this guy hit it out of the park. Well, this is it. This is it. He's it. And I took some notes just a second ago. He talked about hours in August. Well, this whole thing, suspension of policies and everything was about getting someone in here, and it's so needed in August. And now we just hear, I don't know how much time, and I don't know if that's, what he's talking about, a significant loss of hours, or just a few, or what. But I'm a little bit gobsmacked that we went to this great, unusual process, I think a bad process, and here we are, he's telling us he's not gonna be that available in August. So, I'm against this. I'm not against Rob Saxon. I think he's very much in the mainstream of Oregon educational thought, and so I'm not surprised the words he said. I think we get other folks who would say similar words, but I just can't believe that we've gone to this great, odd process, and he says, well, August, I gotta back off. And I don't know with PERS how much time can he work full-time? That's a contract question. I don't know if he's expected to work full-time, but that just leaped out at me right there. So, but this process has been bad. All I ask for the kids that do well here, all I ask them when they go off into the world is to get a fair shake. And we're interviewing one guy, that's not a fair shake. If one guy's got connections to Albany, everyone's like, that's great, and it is good. But it's also, my family's not from Albany. I'm not an educator, but I would never get this chance. My kids would never get a chance like this. So I just, one person, yes or no, not a bad guy, but he can't, he's got to take some time off in August. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Thank you, Director Thompson.
Counsel, do you know the August schedule which we're referring here, or should we?
I think you should ask him. He's explained to me that he has a prearranged trip with a number of individuals out of state in August, and I don't know. I shouldn't represent what I think that is. I think you should ask him.
Well, I think we should ask him before we go any further here.
Okay.
So we know what we're dealing with.
Shall I bring him back in?
Sure. Welcome back.
Mr. Saxon, would you mind just giving us further clarification on your availability in August?
Yeah, yes, I will. It's not good. I will be out of the state beginning about 3 a.m. tomorrow morning until from the, let's see, from the 27th through the 6th. Then I'll be back the 9th through the 13th. And I'll be out of state from the 16th to the 26th. I'll be back on the 27th.
So about 50-50 of the month.
No, less than
Or
that.
one third of the month would be
Yes, about a
present.
third.
Gotcha.
So if I might ask, can I ask one more question? I know
Absolutely.
I'm no technical foul here. So how would you foresee the facilitation of the oversight of the district during that month?
Well, certainly, it would be my intent that there would be at least some instruction on my part moving forward whenever, I mean, I don't know for sure if you all made the decision when that would become official and, when I would be interim if that were to happen, but I would definitely want to have some instruction to be carried forward and I would think that there would need to be a person designated to do that work. And I do think that it's my understanding that there are administrative meetings scheduled on the 4th, 5th, and 3rd, 4th, and 5th?
The third and fourth.
Third and 4th. On the 3rd and 4th, I think it would be really important for me to be present on the first day of those meetings, and so I would like to postpone those if that were to take, if that were to happen, and it could work into people's schedules. I mean, I've got to be somewhat thoughtful there, but I do think that, or that there would be another date set aside for me to address administrative staff. I do think that the all-staff in-service is something I'd be back for. I think that's on the September 2nd. And so that would be possible. And, certainly the days that I would be here would be long days. And I would need to have a schedule designed and put forward before that. I also would have some opportunity to check in, although my availability is going to be tough. I'll have a satellite communicator and periodic cell phone service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Directors Wilson or Nyquist?
So I do think that we are faced with an extraordinary school year. And my concern that society, the school district, the education system doesn't just pretend like 2 years of COVID and kids not getting into the classroom didn't happen. And we have that this year happening. At the same time, we happen to have, as an interim superintendent, probably the most qualified person that's ever applied to be the superintendent of this school district. And based on all of that, I think the reasonable thing to do is to offer Mr. Saxon the position.
He is incredibly qualified. I don't think anybody has any doubt. Director Thompson stated such, and I agree that he is incredibly qualified. I would, if I could wish that he could be here all of August, because I would love to have him at the helm. I would wish for that. However, he had obviously some pre-planned adventures outside of the state. I really feel like we need his leadership for the interim. I know that he will leave great instructions and will get his people in the correct direction. And I do feel that we should move forward with offering him a position.
And my 2 cents is, we didn't give him any softballs tonight. Those were extremely difficult interview questions, and those questions represented us as individuals, it represented the community, and it represented students. And he answered them all adequately when he could have left some of them open-ended or blank, and he was very fair and honest. I would move to item G, action to approve hiring of the interim superintendent.
You looking for a motion at this point?
Yes, sir.
If I can briefly mention an email we got, we were schooled on making a motion by a teacher at Periwinkle. I want to give Jody Dodd a shout out. We all probably all read that, and I think, this was the best moment of it. It says, I would like to point out one grammar mistake that keeps coming up in meetings that when rectified will help all of you sound more professional. When you say I motion to, you are using incorrect grammar. Please instead say I move to or I make a motion to. Thank you very much, Jody. Appreciate that.
We will do better.
We will do better. We will learn. So I motion to approve. I couldn't help myself. I'd like to make a motion to approve hiring Rob Saxton as interim superintendent.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Counsel, what say you?
May I speak? Let's talk about where we are now. Essentially, you have moved to hire Mr. Saxton, and now we're going to try to get him in the boat with a contract, which is not done. So essentially, you're offering him a job. You've moved to do that, to hire him. And now is the time for us to talk about a discussion on the proposed contract terms. That's what I did this weekend. And I think that a draft contract that I put together is in the board packet. Is that right? And hopefully it's been published. This has been quicker than I've ever done before. And one of the negatives on that is the public, if they've had a chance to read it, they've just had a chance this afternoon. I mean, I got this morning from Mr. Saxton after a number of conversations. And I know that the district has had to translate that for our communities who don't speak English. So I'm going to encourage you for us to talk about the contract tonight, and I'm going to encourage you not to take action tonight, to give folks the chance to see what we have in mind, come back Wednesday with this done, and take action. I mean, you've already indicated in your vote that you are offering him this job, and I think there's some work to do, and we can talk about that this evening. I'd like to go through the contract with you, and I don't know whether you'd like to have Mr. Saxton here or not. It's up to you.
Yeah, we can invite him back in. Welcome back, Mr. Saxon. While you have been out, the board did vote to hire you as our interim superintendent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now we are in the nitty-gritty of discussion on your contract.
So, Mr. Saxon, you can certainly make comments. I've just told the board that this is what I put together over the weekend, and you and I discussed this Sunday night. And this morning, you gave me the thumbs up that, at least from your perspective, this is kind of what you have in mind. So the board hasn't talked about this or seen this till this afternoon when we posted it.
Okay.
So this is kind of, again, an unusual process because contract negotiations usually don't happen with us all sitting around in the boardroom together. But that's how you chose to do it. So this is a draft only. As you know, you authorized me to have a discussion about contract terms, but not to commit the board to anything. So on page 1, and I want to make sure that Mr. Saxon has a copy of this.
Thank you.
So on page 1, there's all the wherefore clauses, and then there's the duties of the superintendent. This is pretty standard language with respect to superintendent duties. You also have a board policy that spells out the superintendent duties. So these have carried over from other superintendent contracts, and none of this was essentially changed from kind of standard contract language. Section 2 is 2A, talks about the term of the agreement and the number of hours. So the term is for one academic year, and you'll have to decide when it starts. I mean, it can start upon board action, or it can start on August 1. But you have to, you as a board have to decide when do you want the contract to start. There is a provision under 2B that makes clear that you're hiring a PERS retiree. There's this new law in Senate Bill 1049 that gives retired public employees the right to work full-time, at least until, when is it, the end of 2023, I think, or maybe it's the end of 22. But he'd certainly be eligible under that new provision. And this says that the board would pay the employer's contribution, but you wouldn't be paying his contribution. The term of the agreement is for 190 contract days. And that was at Mr. Saxton's request that you can expect this number of days from him. This is a little bit different from, well, certainly in the number of days, it's different from your previous superintendent contracts. Those are usually, what, 240 or 260?
260.
So it's less number of days. And Mr. Saxon, I don't know if you'd like to comment on your thinking there.
Just simply that superintendent contracts are typically either 260 or 261, depending on how you want to count leap year. And truly. And then there's a certain number of vacation days, and those are variable, 25, 30, 35, it depends on 20. It depends on what gets agreed upon. And whether or not the district pays out for unused vacation days. So those are all things that are part of superintendent contracts. This is what I've done in some consulting work, a lot of this actually. And so, when I look at August and my availability there, and then take out any holidays and 5 days at spring break, 5 days at winter break, and a couple other small calculations, it ends up being about 190 days. And no vacation days. So if I'm take vacation, it's a non-contract day. If I am sick, it's a non-contract day. Whatever. So there's no sick days, there's no vacation days, there's no holidays.
So to clarify, that's 190 work days then?
Right.
Is that what I'm reading?
Correct.
Okay.
And we might have talked about this, but I think the idea was that there's essentially no paid leave, and that's in section 3B. And you listed some of those. And so that would be an unusual part of a superintendent's an interim superintendent or a regular superintendent's contract, because there would be built in all those administrative days that administrative leave days that licensed administrators would receive. And I don't know,
Part of the 260?
well, I don't think it's part of the, so that, my understanding is the 260 is, you'd get paid leave days as part of that 260. Isn't that how you handle it?
Yeah, so it's 25 vacation, 10 sick, 3 personal days. So if you take all of that, and then there's paid holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, it's about 215 days.
So the compensation, Mr. Saxton has asked for $150,000 compensation for 190 days of service to be paid in monthly salary payments. If either the district or the superintendent choose to terminate the agreement before June 30th, the superintendent will be paid a prorated amount based on the number of days of service. So this is important for you all to understand, that if you were to find another superintendent candidate who you were very interested in, and you wanted to hire her or him during the term of this contract, Mr. Saxon has agreed that he'd just be paid the prorated amount, and that would be that. There is a provision on health insurance you need to understand. That's 3D. So he will be provided health insurance benefits that are consistent with other district administrators during the term of this agreement, which would be very standard. But here's what is not standard. For 2 years following the termination of this contract until November 1, 2024. So as part of his compensation, he is requesting that the board consider essentially 2 more years of health insurance to terminate on November 1, 2024. The only caveat there is that I built a provision that says if the board terminates him before the end of the contract, he still gets that going forward. If he terminates the agreement before June 30, 2022, the health insurance is also prorated. So he would not get 2 more years. Have I stated that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. And in total, I mean, I think it's really important that if a superintendent candidate comes up who can be your superintendent, long-term, permanently, you should move and get me back to retirement as quickly as possible. And so if that opportunity presents itself, I think this is just a way that, sort of makes that all work. I do have health insurance through employment agreement that I have with another entity in the state. Doing this work, I won't have that. And that's part of the reason that the health insurance was important to me to be in here, because I'm going to give that up with where I am and what I'm doing right now. And so if I'm going to give that up, I think that there's a need to have coverage.
Any board members have questions on that provision?
Is there an annualized cost to that? Do we know?
I haven't done any money calculations.
I don't have a number in my pocket for this specific case. At the low end of it, it would be about $12,000 a year.
And just for, my calculation was 15, just a guess. I really don't know what the number is and didn't spend any time or have time to figure that out. I figured somewhere around 15 and think that number makes sense to me.
So on Section E, after health insurance, there's a tax-sheltered annuity of $833 a month, which works out to $10,000 a year. There's an expense reimbursement that's, well, first of all, the TSA is pretty standard in superintendent contracts. The expense reimbursement is very standard. If you're going to ask the interim superintendent to go to a conference or something of this nature, you're going to have to pay the expenses. He's requesting an auto allowance of $500 per month for each month worked. Again, that's pretty common in superintendent contracts. A technology allowance, and maybe you could speak to that, Mr. Saxton, and what you have in mind. I mean, the question is, what technology, where does it live after you leave?
Yes, so really, it's about, cell phone and the idea that I'm going to be available 24/7, 190 or 365 or whatever the number is. Not just in 190-day contract at all times, and I need to keep that. And then also I know there will be an expectation for home internet and that kind of thing. And so I'm not talking about purchase, I'm talking about, keeping those things for communication.
Okay. And then section I in the draft just, again, kind of emphasizes the proration that if the superintendent prorates, or if the superintendent leaves, certain things get prorated based upon his decision to leave. And if you ask him to leave, other things get prorated. So that's kind of the guts of the compensation package. And again, I'm not the money person. I don't know. $150,000 is, we understand how much that is a month. But how much some of these other things cost, like health insurance, I've done none of those calculations. Section 4 is a provision about termination of the contract. First of all, we say that this agreement's not going to be extended or renewed, and Mr. Saxton has already agreed as a qualified candidate that he's not eligible to be the permanent superintendent. So in any event, this contract's not getting renewed, and during the term, either party has the right to terminate the agreement without cause by providing 30 days' notice. So that's fairly self-explanatory. There's a professional development provision that's fairly standard in superintendent contracts that allows the superintendent to have some annual memberships, which you're going to expect of him. There's an attorney fee provision if the parties get crosswise on the contract. Standard. There's an indemnity provision, and just for those of you who don't know what that is, under the Oregon Tort Claims Act, all district employees are indemnified for lawsuits that arise within the course and scope of their employment. So there's a statutory provision, but all superintendent contracts would have an indemnity provision that says the same thing, and that's what's in Section 7. Section 8, this agreement is construed under the laws of the state of Oregon. So I didn't do much negotiation on your behalf because we've never talked about compensation. So in a rather awkward meeting like this, you can talk in front of the guy you want to hire about what you think this is reasonable. What do you want to do?
I have a question and then a request. The 190 days is counted work days. That doesn't preclude the fact that as the superintendent of the school district, you literally would have to be available 24/7. And you're going to do events on Saturday, or if you get the call, you're going to do ever. So it's, in my view, just a different approach to that. And having said that, we've been at this about an hour and a half. Might I get a 5-minute recess? Please, the board.
We return in 5 minutes. We're at recess. right, we have returned to recess at 7:50. Board members are still deliberating and consulting about the proposed contract for the interim superintendent. Is there any further discussion?
I had asked, may I speak?
Yes, sir.
I had asked the board if you had any questions of me. Again, I've not really negotiated anything. I've put together a proposal from Mr. Saxton, and I put it in a form that I felt protected the district with various contingencies, which is my job for you. But you folks are the money people, and only you can approve the contract. Again, because this has been such an accelerated process, I would like you to consider not voting tonight on it and having a short meeting on Wednesday. I think the community needs to be able to digest this, especially our communities who have only just seen this in the language that they can read. But again, I'm the guy who has kept dragging his foot on you to say, have more meetings, have more meetings. So this is totally up to you, but we can fine tune this if you have any questions or want any changes. I have talked with Mr. Saxton about what he would envision going forward since he's going to leave tomorrow morning. But let's focus on the contract first. And what I'm looking for right now is, number one, consensus, or if anybody has a different idea on the compensation, the fringe benefits, et cetera.
I have questions. I might. Counsel, is this contract inconsistent with what would be total monetary value, what would be offered or signed in a school district this size?
It's a hard question to answer because you have superintendents who are brand new, and you have superintendents who have a great deal of experience. So this is probably on the low side for a more senior superintendent for a district your size, in my opinion.
Let me ask you another question. Would this contract be on the low side for someone of Mr. Saxon's resume?
Well, he obviously is an experienced superintendent, so if he were looking for another interim job in another district, I don't know what number he'd ask for, but he's his own consultant on this, so he could probably tell you. I mean, he's an experienced superintendent, and depending on the size of the district, this number would be higher. I mean, it's a pretty general question, but that's my answer.
Executive Director Betcher.
I think it might be useful to have kind of a bracket for considering this. One bracket, I believe, is what you've laid out with the high end and the experience. The other low end piece of the bracket would be to compare this to the recently renewed contract for our previous superintendent. This contract is significantly more generous than the previous contract was. And the numbers are off and they're different, but you have to actually go through and look at the math in total compensation. And that becomes especially true if the board were to exercise the options that would shorten the duration of the contract, where some of those things that weren't prorated would play out or pay out at their full value.
Can I ask you, you say that based on what? I don't see any numbers in that indicate that.
When you take the $150,000 that are in there, divide it by the 190 days that are laid out in the contract, and you figure out a per-day cost, add in also the prorated TSA, the health insurance, whether it's prorated or not, gets a little wonky. All of that together, the per-day cost for this contract would be higher than the per-day cost of the previous superintendent's contract.
$93 a day.
So
That may be a premium the board is willing to make. I'm not arguing for or against
Well, I
that.
think we need to be careful because compensation for public employees in general, there's the dollar amount, and then there's PERS, and then there's medical. And the other big expense is paying people for days off. That I mean, for every dollar we spend, it costs us, for every dollar we pay somebody in salary generally, it costs us two. The fringe costs are much higher than the private sector. And much of that is generous paid leave, vacation days, and those things like that. And as I understand this contract, it doesn't include any of those days. And in fact, the interim superintendent would be not working just those days.
The math is not the same. We can lay out a side-by-side comparison
Well,
for you before the next meeting.
190 work days, I mean, it's division. It's 700 and something dollars a day. With the benefits, it's 900 and something dollars as a daily rate. It's just a fact. It can be debatable
And-
around whether or not it's worth it or anything else like that, but that's just math.
Again, directors, I haven't crunched any numbers. These are, this is a proposal, and what you're contracting for is this individual who you've interviewed tonight. And I don't know what to do with the money. I mean, to me, it doesn't make any difference, because I'm not deciding about the money. It's just, if you want this person, he said he'll take time away from his consulting work for one academic year, and this is the price.
And for clarity, I was not arguing for or against it. I was simply putting context to it for the board's consideration.
And I know we wanted to make the public aware of the contract, but I also look at Mr. Saxon's qualifications and his resume, his answering the questions tonight, and you have to look at dollars per experience. You know, I don't see necessarily a reason to delay this. I am strongly for it. When you hire someone in an emergency, you end up paying more. It's like booking a last minute flight. But I don't think it is more. That's the thing, is when you compare his resume on that spectrum of dollars. And that's one of the reasons I'm for this.
So I would say this, and I don't know where we go process-wise. Normally, we would ask counsel and the superintendent to work out the final details of the contract, and for counsel to come back with us, I guess, Wednesday, as you've recommended.
Yes, I'm suggesting that you get the public an opportunity to see this, read it, and give any comments to you, and come back and vote on it Wednesday. Unless the board gives me direction on a different number, a different kind of proposal, this is the final for my work. And so I'll need to hear from the board. Do you want to see something different than is right here? Because I mean, we can't meet in an executive session to talk about this. We've gone over that. I've had a candid conversation with your candidate. He said, I will do this work faithfully with these terms. So any counteroffer has to come from you tonight, for me to put in this contract for you to consider next, on Wednesday.
So I guess I would ask Mr. Saxon, if I can, how much does it put you behind for a Wednesday today?
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Wednesday I don't think it changes anything of substance. If I'm going to be gone tomorrow, I don't think it changes anything of substance. I do think that it would be important for me to put together some written direction that could go out after Wednesday. And I would have some time to do that either this evening or tomorrow during travel. And under the assumption that there would be approval and that there could be some things then that could happen until I'm back. And so I guess I would just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
I would move approval of the contract as presented.
There's been a motion made to approve the contract as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Congratulations, Mr. Saxton, you have a contract. Maybe we can get you to sign it tonight.
Yes, maybe so. No, yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if there's any other business before the board, but I would like, since you have approved this contract tonight, I need to take draft off of here. And so I'll need to finalize the contract. And then I'll present it to Mr. Saxton for his approval and for board chair's approval.
Thank you, council. Any further business for the board?
We're scheduled to meet on August what?
Ninth.
Might we attempt to hold that meeting at a school? South Albany High School as an example? Is that functionally doable technically?
It would have to be in probably either of the theaters. It would be, and I would just defer to Director Buttram in terms of facilities, what their maintenance planning is in terms of like cleaning, waxing floors, things like that.
I can do some research and find out.
Yeah. I would like to start that process of talking with the public instead of folks just talking at each other. And the bigger the facility and the more participation we can have, the better to do that, in my view.
Agreed.
And I would put out again that we are planning to have listening sessions coming up and a work session in September on parliamentary procedure as well.
Could remind the board members, we're supposed to email Chris Green the dates that we're available to do these listening sessions, because I forgot what the program that was sent out, but it had Eastern times on there and that wasn't made clear. And so it looked like we were gonna be there till midnight and everyone just kind of went, whoa. So if we could just maybe email her what we can do, and I think that would help.
Thank you, Director Wilson.
Question,
Yes, sir.
Chair. I mentioned that the board needs to decide when this contract is effective.
As
Is it
of
effective
26 July.
as of today,
Yes, sir.
okay?
Do we need to make a vote on that? No?
It was the
You
intent of
can.
the maker of the
I mean,
motion that it start immediately.
You
Passed it.
You
so-
passed it today, so, I mean, it's a contract today,
Right.
That's how we do policy, is it effective that day.
okay?
And we are adjourned at 8:04. Thank you, everyone.